This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like, and other people as well. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we simply cannot thank you enough. This episode is part of a series in partnership with the Israel office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, taking a deep dive into issues that shape our lives here in Israel. My guest today is a German anti-discrimination activist, focusing mainly on countering antisemitism among soccer fans. He has served as the head of the Corporate Social Responsibility Department of Borussia Dortmund, the German soccer club, and is the founder of What Matters, an NGO that tackles racism, antisemitism, and discrimination on the soccer field and elsewhere. Daniel Locher, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I want to start actually with something that didn't happen in Germany, but happened in the Netherlands, and that is the violence that we saw in Amsterdam earlier this month around a soccer match between Maccabi Tel Aviv and Ajax Amsterdam. This violence surprised many observers, the extent of it, its systematic nature. As someone who's been involved in countering racist violence among soccer fans for a long time, were you surprised when you saw it?
Definitely, yeah. I was totally surprised of what was going on. And I would always explain that for me, it's not like if I look on what was happening, I would say that it was not typical football violence. And like there's nothing to explain or to not judge football violence in general. But I think this case really differs from others. Showed itself in a complete different way, and that's why, from my perspective, also it's very, it's kind of a game-changing moment in a bad way.
Because it wasn't directly related to soccer fans and to the match itself, but actually it was violence against people who happen to be soccer fans.
Yeah, I think like what is so important to point out is that the violent people or like the attackers weren't really related to the football club, and this is like a difference from typical football violence where you have two clubs or like two supporters groups that are maybe attacking each other, like we have seen this back from the 1980s with hooligan movements. It's still a topic, but here the targeted supporters were not targeted because of their club. They were targeted because they were Jews and Israelis. And this is really a difference from my perspective. And also the attackers were not connected at all to Ajax Amsterdam. So also from like the home team, where you usually you can blame one side, or afterwards you can blame both sides. And there needs to be discussion on how to solve violence within football. But here it's a completely different case. The football game was just the occasion for such a riot that was taking place, just targeting Jews and Israelis. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it is different from the type of anti-Semitic racist violence, or just also hate speech that you usually work with?
Yes, definitely. I really need to point out that our usual target group is the bystanders and the positive force within the stands. This is the ones we really want to reach out to, but I can tell you from my work within Borussia Dortmund that like offenders or people that were using anti-Semitic chants or something, the club tried to ban them depending on what happened. There was a decision to ban the supporters. So like there are 3 different groups we can work with and within the football sphere. And from my perspective, always the most important are the bystanders and the positive force, like to empower people, to bring education to people, to help people understanding situations, and on a structural level also to empower the clubs, like to set up structures. There are many clubs in Germany that are using a code word, and if you are offended by somebody else. It could also be something like sexual violence, sexism. It could be racism. It could be anti-Semitism. You can go to a steward in the stadium, say this code word, and without being asked any question, you will be brought to a safe room where experts are taking care of you or of this person. So of the offended person. So I think there's two different fields. Like one is the structural question, and then of course within the groups in whom to target. And this is what I see here as well. Like the attacking group is not a fan group that Ajax Amsterdam now can start working with, because it was just in is a bad word here, but it was people from the city of Amsterdam, and especially in this case Arab looking people and Arab speaking people attacking Israelis and Jews. That differs completely.
Well, let's just switch to your field of expertise, which is really what happens on the soccer field and around it. How prevalent really is anti-Semitism and racism among, let's say, German soccer fans in the 21st century?
It was like very, very obvious from back to the 90s until mid of the 2000s. There were anti-Semitic chants in the stadiums. There were Hitler salutes in the stadium, racist chants. And this really changed with the beginning of the ultra movement and in many cities, or like in many stadiums all over Germany. The stadiums became more quiet, and in the same time, when we look on this incidents nowadays, of course, still incidents can happen within the stadium, because like the people who go to the stadium are somehow the group that is presented in the social society of Germany. So of course there are people with racist thoughts in their mind, or racist or anti-Semitic thoughts. But the question is in how the clubs are prepared and what the clubs are doing, what kind of climate in the stadium they are creating for people to feel safe. So I would say if we compare football supporters, they are not an only group within the social society. They are coming from all different groups in social society. So you can more or less copy paste what's going on in the society also to a football stadium. And then of course it differs, because there people interact with each other that usually wouldn't interact, because just they share the values of the club or the love for the same club. So it's this is, I think, the most positive thing about it. And I would say, especially in German football, we haven't had a big incident after October 7th when it came to, like in other stadiums across Europe, you had like very bad banners, for example, with Celtic Glasgow. You had Palestine flags all over. And I think the German case really was different. And at least it was quiet, or it was positive in one way or the other.
Well, there are many things here, and I hope to take them part one by one. But you said that for a long time, or for some time, there were expressions of anti-Semitism, like Hitler salutes, etc., on German soccer fields. It seems like there is a difference in degrees between German football and perhaps a broader discourse in Germany, that it is perhaps more legitimate among soccer fans, or less frowned upon than in the broader German discourse. Is my observation correct? And if so, why do you think it is?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I would disagree, because from my perspective, the German football somehow really differs from German society. Like we had demonstrations that were supporting Hamas. We had demonstrations that were supporting Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations and the Iranian regime in German society. And we haven't had it in German football. And that, like, I would say that the last really big incident with an Hitler salute, for example, is lasting some years back. Of course, there are somehow incidents, but very often you can really compare them to one individual or a small group of people, because the clubs set it up a climate where it's difficult for people to interact this way. still, I don't want to say it's like the dream world and everything is fine and just the sun is shining. Like, this is not what I try to point out. There are incidents, but the way the incidents are tackled is very professional, or it became very professional in the last years. And the people around in the stadium, I would always describe it somehow like by the bystanders, like the people that just go there to watch football. They don't have an own political idea in mind when they go to a football match. They just want to have a good time. But even they were addressed in the last years with messaging, with activities, so that they are aware of a kind of this risk that some people behave in a bad way, and they can react as well. So like the climate really changed. And I would say in German football, we really haven't had big incidents. And I also see it in regards, especially now in the last 13 months after October 7th, that it's the work of the years before really showed some impact.
Yeah, so the climate changed, and as you said, there was a lot of concerted effort put into it by the clubs themselves, but that started for a reason, right? I mean, the clubs said, okay, we need to tackle anti-Semitism or whatever, to do something about it in an organized way because of something, right? So what was the climate before, and can you describe how they came to that conclusion that they need to do something about it?
Yeah, I would say that German football was facing a problem within the hooligan movement. It was very often a combination of hooligans and people from the extreme right. Even though not everybody of them was sharing the same political views, the violence was kind of the glue between these groups. And there was a lot of things going on. And of course, German football had the first campaign against racism was back in 1994. Very funny, by the way, today, like it was called "My Neighbor is a Foreigner," or like my good friend is a foreigner, and it's like nobody would use it in this way nowadays. It's a very funny claim back then, but back then it was quite useful, and people were realizing that there is a problem. And then two things happened. One thing was definitely that the World Cup in 2006 was going to take part in Germany. This was the moment when the German Football Association started to do research on their own role within the National Socialist era. Many clubs followed in this period. You can really see like the first research on Borussia Dortmund, on Schalke 04, on Bayern Munich. All these first researches came out around the World Cup 2006, and it was the same with the German Football Association. So this was one thing that was going on. And then the second thing, and this is from my perspective also very important, if we look on the fan structures in this moment on the last 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s, the ultra movement came somehow to the German clubs. And in many cases, like for example, by Werder Bremen, Bayern Munich, it was and there are some others. I don't want to just showcase one specific club. There were different clubs where the ultra movement were the ones who brought, on the one hand, back atmosphere to the stadiums, because there was kind of an lack of atmosphere after the hooligan movement was targeted. And the second thing they brought in, it was young people, it was students, it was workers, it was people that became political without being party political, and they brought values to the stands, and they stopped the songs. And it was sometimes, or in many cases, it was kind of an engagement within the club, but the more important thing was the engagement within the fan groups, which is also my heritage, like where I'm coming from. And these groups were pushing the clubs to the positioning of taking responsibility, seeing how important they are, like when it comes to creating values, to take action. And it was really, in many cases, 20 years ago, the supporters pushing the clubs to taking over this responsibility.
How do you differentiate between what needs to be done vis-a-vis anti-Semitism and other forms of racism, or even just hooliganism?
Yeah, I would always differ between violence and racism and anti-Semitism, because football violence needs to be targeted, but in a different way. there needs to be programs with offenders. There needs to be also like force to push some people, which is not really my case. It's more something for the security officers and for the social workers within the FEN projects. Like I would say, this is sometimes like it's more about building relations and have a good relationship to people that can become violent. And there it differs from targeting anti-Semitism, racism, other forms of or forms of discrimination, because this needs to be targeted all over the stadium, because it's a smaller group that can be violent instead of like everybody in the stadium somehow has own racist or anti-Semitic views in their mind. And this is where we start our programs. It's really about educating people in a wide range, dealing with anti-Semitism, dealing with racism, and always with the question of the own role in it and the own perspectives on racism. And one could really learn a lot about oneself. Everybody grew up in different circumstances, but of course there were narratives that we as individuals take over, and to reflect, and not just to say we are against anti-Semitism, but to reflect like how can I identify anti-Semitism, how could I define it, and how did it impact me maybe without me realizing that it was anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
And this creates a change from my perspective. And there's a difference between violence and then tackling discrimination, racism, and anti-Semitism.
Yeah, but the whole thing about anti-Semitism in Germany is that it's really, education on anti-Semitism is pretty prevalent. I mean, the schooling system. I mean, Germany can be also pointed out as there's almost this, textbook case of how to deal with racism and anti-Semitism. What measures need to be tackled, especially on the soccer field and among soccer fans, that they cannot find and are not exposed to elsewhere in Germany?
First of all, from a German perspective, I would say we can do much better.
Yeah,
It's
okay,
funny
sure.
how you describe it from an abroad perspective.
No, but what I'm saying is, it's not like that anti-Semitism is something that is completely normalized and prevalent in Germany, and just as soon as they walk into the football field, suddenly they encounter educational stuff on anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and here I think that's the good thing about sports in general and about football or in soccer in particular. We can reach out to people in each and every age group. We can reach out to people with different financial, educational backgrounds, from different working fields, like from each and every sphere within the German society. You will find football supporters and our soccer supporters, and the interesting thing is that they all can stick together as one group because they share the love for the same club. And this is the huge positive thing we have in German football, and why it is such a great field of interaction. And then there's a second point that we try to use. There is always an identification of the supporters with their clubs, but also with the city of the club. It's a very strong bond. In many cities in Germany, on match days, you can't walk on the streets without realizing that there are some supporters on the streets already in the morning when the game is in the evening. People meet on the sphere of football. So there is an interest, and there's also an interest in tradition, and this is what we use in our educational programs, and why it is so done in a proper way that we have why we had such an impact in the last years. We use this identification, and then we talk. Okay, if we talk about the history of our city and how proud we are about our city, let's talk about the National Socialist era, and let's have a look on the anti-Semitic pressure that was created here. Let's look on the Jewish life before the Second World War in the city. Let's find out which places we walk by each and every day that used to be very important for the Jewish community, or also for other targeted groups within or persecuted groups within National Socialism. And from there on, one could really start interesting educational programs. And you can, like, for example, within Borussia Dortmund, we have a guided tour through the north part of the city where the club was founded, but also in the area where many Jews of the city lived. So we combine it. We talk about the funding of the club and also about the Jewish heritage of this part of the city and what happened in National Socialism, both to Borussia Dortmund and to the Jewish community in Dortmund. So that's for the supporters. The entry point is football and their identification with their own club. But the second step is history, and they are interested in it. And I think this really creates an impact. And this is why, and like, it comes from a different motivation, and then people find out with, like, watching the history or looking at the history, learning from the history, they found out, wow, anti-Semitism is still a topic. And
so basically, soccer and the whole culture around it is essentially a vehicle for educational content, which is really nice. And I want to ask you about the supporters, the participants. I mean, is it are they willfully taking part in it, or is it does it take a lot of convincing to get? I mean, they're at the end of the day, they're football supporters, right? They want to see a match, maybe drink beer, and not much else. I mean, are they happy to take part in this rather heavy educational program?
Such a good question, and I love to answer it, because there were now polls that Holocaust education don't lead to combating anti-Semitism automatically, and I really like to share it because it's such amazing. We never forced a person to take part in a program. The first program we did within Borussia Dortmund, for example, let's stick with this case. There are many, many others, and they are all the same within German football. The first program we did was we invited multipliers from the stands, people we knew that they have kind of an interest, but that they especially can have an influence on others in the stands. And they took part in the program. And the programs it's a preparation workshop in Dortmund. Then we are going to it's two different. We can stick with the example Auschwitz. We are going 7 days to the city of Oświęcim, which is now the Polish name of the city that was used to be the so-called Musterstadt Auschwitz. And we are 7 days on site and doing program not just in the memorial site, but also in places or former parts of Auschwitz that are not part of the museum nowadays. And then we come back and there's a pre-preparation or like post-program meeting, and afterwards we address these participants during the year with different offers like workshops, lectures, meeting Holocaust survivors. Now we added meeting survivors from October 7th. So there's different programs going on. And once you were part of this multi-day program, you are addressed again and again and again. Like, this is, from my perspective, first and foremost, the most important thing, to have the readdressing of the participants. And let me come back to your question, that what we created is kind of a positive narrative. We have about 250 applications. It's an open call. It's on the website and the app and the social media channels of the club. We say, hey, you are interested in joining us for the next round of educational programs, just sign up. And then we have 250 applications for about 25 to maximum 30.
Is it just in Dortmund or all over Germany?
It's in many. Dortmund is kind of specific, but it's in many, like, because they have three types of this educational programs, 2 for supporters and 1 for employees. But it's kind of the same in Germany. Each and every club at least is doing a program also tailor-made for their specific case. Like, you don't have, not every group needs to go to Auschwitz. Like, let's focus on what was the history of your city, and let's see where people were deported to, and there we can do a program. But to make this connection from the city and to the memorial site, and then back to the city, and creating nowadays better society. But it's so interesting how many people show up, and we just had recently, we had an information session about October 7th with 2 survivors from the kibbutz Nahal Oz in southern Israel. And it was participants from our education program in 2011 that showed up.
Right.
And it's 13 years, and they are still addressed and still are taking part. And out of this is created a network. Like, people talk to each other. They know, he was taking part as well. So I know if something is going to happen, he was already in the program as well. I can talk to him. Like, this is how it works.
Recently, you organized an international conference that's dedicated to anti-Semitism in football, involving other countries, England and others. Can you say something about the difference in the challenges that you meet in Germany and that others meet in other countries in Europe or maybe the wider world?
I can try to explain. It's part of a program that we are running with the World Jewish Congress, which is our partner in this. Specifically, it's called Together Through Sports. That's the main idea, and we want to copy the case from Germany to other European countries. Of course, being aware of the fact that the starting points are different, or the narratives in each and every country are different. I need to point out one more specific thing that is important to explain or to answer your question. The German Football League back in 2016 started education programs for fan relation managers within each and every club to educate them. Like, we were running these programs for the German Football League to educate them on anti-Semitism, on Holocaust remembrance. We even now had 5 programs in former concentration camps for several days for this specific group to bring the people in the position to take action themselves, like multipliers within the club structures. And we did it also this year. World Jewish Congress and us brought 8 German football teams and the German Football League to Israel in May, to have an own experience and an own understanding of what was going on in October 7th. Which leads to credibility for the participants if they start to talk in their own clubs. But it also leads to another network within the professional structure of football. And here's the difference from my perspective to other countries in Europe. Very often, I would say, for example, the UEFA No to Racism campaign is kind of something that the UEFA is sending out. Clubs are somehow forced to take part. Of course, many of them are willing to take part, but it's about the message. They use the platform of sports to send the message. And this is one thing that one could find across Europe. You have different clubs taking responsibility with sending messages, but very often, and this is not about blaming, it's just about explaining, because I think the message itself is important already, but very often the second step is missing, and this is to really work on the topic in the background. And here I see a difference when it comes to professional structures of football clubs. In Germany, every team is forced to have at least 3 fan relations managers within their own structure. If you play in the first league, in the second league, it's 2 persons, but the departments are much bigger. It's in Dortmund, it's 11 people working in this specific department. In Munich, it's about the same amount of people. And here's the difference to, for example, let me point out it with the UK. You, of course, also have like community managers within the UK, but very often the engagement is donating money to an organization that is then doing good things. But it's not using the platform of the club itself. It's a difference if you use the platform of the club and you do it not in your own facilities, or you do it in your facilities, and that the people have the feeling they are experiencing something with their own club.
Yeah, it's taking advantage of that spirit, the esprit de corps that many football fans have.
Exactly. And to use this identification for everybody is something special to interact with the club, and here I see a huge difference. And then, of course, I would say very often it's a problem that, and this also I can explain with the German and the abroad context. In Germany, the engagement or the work on Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism lasts now for about 8 to 10 years within the professional football structures. When October 7th happened, German clubs were aware of the Middle East conflict. They were aware of anti-Semitism. They had a relationship to the topic, and within the most clubs, there was no discussion needed on anti-Semitism. Should we make a statement or not? Because it was already there. There were created values. And I think this is also something that differs from other European countries, even though in the UK there is a lot going on. There's a lot of very, very good projects. Clubs are organizing Hanukkah parties for their supporters, and the Jewish community is much more visible within the society than it is in Germany, for example. But still, it's somehow, this is the difference, because it was not about like there is already a value or there is already a common understanding of the topic. So, and if then something is going to happen like October 7th, and you need to start to discuss in where are you standing, what are your values, what is your expertise on the topic, it's of course difficult to make statements.
Yeah. Well, what do you do to solve the age-old problem of how to differentiate between anti-Semitism and criticism of the state of Israel, or bad feelings that are rising around the conflict in the Middle East?
It's a very good question, because I think it's a thin line somehow. And I think there are many people who are really anti-Semitic who try to hide behind the so-called critics of Israel. And I always try to get behind it, and what is the motivation behind it. Is it really about a humanitarian perspective? Is it really about the people in Gaza, for example, or is it about blaming Israel and Jews? And here's, from my perspective, the most shocking thing after October 7th is seeing Jewish communities across the globe being attacked for something that was going on in Israel. And like, we can even leave out if it's about like October 7th and a terrorist attack, where we don't have to question ourselves who was the offender. It was a terrorist attack. And this is how, for example, Borussia Dortmund was dealing with it. We dealt in the completely same way like we did with the terrorist attack in Paris on the Bataclan.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was yesterday, 5 years ago. The terrorist attack in Berlin. This was the way we dealt as a club with this situation on October 7th in particular. And the second thing is that, and this is also one thing that we find out during the last year, it's so difficult to understand the Middle East conflict. It's so difficult to, many people feel insecure to talk about it, but in the same time, many people have the feeling of they want to talk about it. And then you are judged for questions, or you're blamed for wrong statements. And very often, I'm not talking about the people running on the streets with Hamas flags. This is not the people I talk about. But in like a general society, like the majority of the society, people are not really informed about the topic. And there is no field where you can find information. And this is what we did after October 7th. We were setting up calls in kind of safe spaces, and we told the people, first of all, you can ask us here each and every question. We will not blame the question as long as you are open for an argument. Mm-hmm. And this led to so many interesting discussions, and people have the chance to understand. And we were inviting a peace activist and journalist from Israel who was explaining the situation on October 7th. On a later stage, we invited, like after a month, I would say, we invited families of hostages to this calls. So the first half an hour was about the hostage itself. We talked about the person. Very often there was the question, what could be done, how to raise awareness, and so on and so on. And the second half of the call was about getting an understanding of what was going on October 7th, what happened afterwards, and how can we empower them with arguments for their own discussions within their structures. the first step, of course, like empowering them, was always our target. But even if we just reach the goal of getting information to people and they can feel safe to ask questions, this was the main goal of the calls itself.
Right. Even if there are questions that are challenging whatever assumptions.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing, I just want to point it out, I would of course blame anti-Semitism if it's anti-Semitism, but I think it's important to look behind the motivation. And for me, the red lines here are clear. If you're questioning the state of Israel for existing, you definitely have an anti-Semitic problem, because it's the only state where you ask this question. Never in the world somebody asks the question about the United States of America. And like, there are points where we need to be clear and where we have to set a good argument, but there are many cases where people just want to understand, and this is where I differ, or where we try to differ.
Right. All right, Daniel Löscher, it seems like you're doing a lot of work and that it's bearing fruit, and I would like to congratulate you for it, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. And just for me, very important, I always say it, I still have friends whose beloved ones are in Gaza, and wherever I am, I always have this as a last sentence, bring them home now.
Yes, I mean, and a swift end to this ongoing tragedy that we've seen lasting for too long. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
And also many thanks to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios, and to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for the generous support. And now we've got a request, because most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has more than 1,000 interviews by now. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and most important, join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from me here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.